What would you do if you discovered that everything you believed about reality was a carefully constructed lie? What if the person you trusted most in the world turned out to be something far beyond human comprehension? And what if your entire existence was nothing more than an experiment conducted by beings whose motives remained hidden in the shadows of space and time? In the quiet suburbs of Denver, Colorado, Dr. Sarah Chen thought she had seen it all during her 15 years as a neurologist. Brain tumors, strokes, mysterious seizures that defied medical explanation. But nothing in her extensive medical training could have prepared her for the case that would shatter her understanding of consciousness, memory, and the very nature of human identity. It started with a patient who called himself Marcus Webb, a man who claimed to be a champion fighter from another world. A man who spoke of battles fought in arenas that existed beyond the reach of human technology. A man whose memories seemed to span decades, yet whose body showed no signs of aging. A man who would challenge everything Dr. Chen believed about the limits of human potential and the boundaries between reality and delusion. But Marcus Webb was not delusional. He was not suffering from a brain injury or psychological breakdown. He was something far more extraordinary and terrifying than anyone could imagine. And when he finally woke up asking what year it was, the truth that emerged would force humanity to confront a reality so shocking that it would change the course of history forever. This is the story of how one doctor's encounter with an impossible patient led to the discovery of a secret that had been hidden from humanity for generations. A secret that would reveal the true nature of human consciousness and our place in a universe far stranger and more dangerous than we ever dared to imagine. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to ease the tension headache that had been building for the past 3 hours. The fluorescent lights in the emergency room cast their usual harsh glow over the chaotic scene below, but tonight felt different. More electric. More charged with an energy she couldn't quite identify. She had been working at Denver General Hospital for over a decade, and, in that time, she had seen her fair share of unusual cases. But nothing had prepared her for the call that came in at 11:47 p.m. on that cold October night. The paramedics had found a man unconscious in Cheeseman Park, lying perfectly still on a bench as if he had simply decided to take a nap under the starlit sky. What made the case unusual wasn't the location or the circumstances. It was the man himself. The paramedics' report had been sparse but intriguing. The patient appeared to be in his early 30s, approximately 6 feet tall, with an athletic build that suggested years of intensive physical training. His vital signs were stable, but there was something off about them. His heart rate was slower than normal, his breathing deeper and more controlled than typical for an unconscious person. Most puzzling of all, his body temperature was exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, despite having been lying outside in near-freezing weather for what appeared to be several hours. When the ambulance arrived at the hospital, Dr. Chen was the attending neurologist on call. She had been expecting a routine case of hypothermia, possibly complicated by drug use or alcohol poisoning. Instead, she found herself staring at a patient who defied every medical explanation she could think of. The man's skin showed no signs of frostbite or exposure. His clothing, while slightly damp from the evening dew, was otherwise unremarkable. Dark jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and leather boots that looked expensive but not flashy. No identification, no wallet, no phone. Nothing that could give them a clue about who he was or where he had come from. But it was his hands that caught Dr. Chen's attention first. They were covered in what appeared to be fresh calluses, the kind that came from gripping something repeatedly and with great force. His knuckles bore the telltale scars of someone who had been in multiple fights, but the injuries were old and well-healed. More interesting still were the faint marks around his wrists and ankles, circular patterns that looked almost like rope burns, but with a precision that suggested they had been made by something far more sophisticated than ordinary restraints. Dr. Chen ordered a full battery of tests. Blood work, toxicology screening, CT scans, MRI. While they waited for the results, she began her preliminary examination. The patient's reflexes were normal, but unusually sharp. When she tested his pupil response with a penlight, his eyes reacted with a speed and precision that seemed almost mechanical. His muscle tone was extraordinary, suggesting a level of physical conditioning that went far beyond what most athletes achieved. The first anomaly appeared when the blood work came back. The patient's blood chemistry was perfect. Not just normal, but absolutely perfect. His cholesterol levels, blood sugar, protein markers, everything was exactly where it should be for optimal human health. It was as if someone had designed his physiology rather than letting it develop naturally. But that was nothing compared to what the imaging revealed. The CT scan showed a brain structure that was fundamentally normal, but with some unusual characteristics. The patient's brain tissue was denser than average, with neural pathways that seemed to fire in patterns that Dr. Chen had never seen before. The MRI revealed something even more puzzling. Areas of the brain that typically showed signs of wear and tear from years of use appeared completely pristine, as if they belonged to someone much younger. Dr. Chen was studying the scans when the patient began to stir. She rushed to his bedside, clipboard in hand, ready to begin the standard post-unconsciousness evaluation. But, as the man's eyes opened, she found herself momentarily speechless. His eyes were a deep blue, almost violet in the harsh hospital lighting, and they held an intelligence and awareness that seemed far too sharp for someone who had just regained consciousness. He sat up slowly, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of perfect body control. His gaze swept the room, taking in every detail with the systematic thoroughness of someone conducting a tactical assessment. When his eyes finally settled on Dr. Chen, she felt an odd chill run down her spine. "Where am I?" he asked, and his voice was clear and strong, showing no signs of confusion or disorientation. "You're at Denver General Hospital," Dr. Chen replied, falling back on her medical training. "You were found unconscious in Cheeseman Park. Do you remember how you got there?" The man was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful rather than confused. "I remember fighting," he said finally. "There was an arena, crowds cheering, the taste of blood in my mouth." "But that can't be right, can it?" Dr. Chen made a note on her chart. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he said without hesitation. "Marcus Webb. Do you know what year it is, Marcus?" That was when something changed in his expression. The confidence wavered, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "The last thing I remember clearly was 2018. But that feels like a lifetime ago. Like I've lived through years of experiences that couldn't have happened." Dr. Chen frowned. "What kind of experiences?" Marcus swung his legs over the side of the hospital bed, and she noticed that he moved with the unconscious confidence of someone accustomed to physical perfection. "Fighting," he said again. "But not in any ring or cage I've ever seen. The arena was massive, with technology that shouldn't exist. My opponents." He paused, as if struggling to find the right words. "They weren't human." The rational part of Dr. Chen's mind immediately jumped to the most likely explanations. Head trauma could cause vivid hallucinations and memory confusion. Certain drugs could create experiences so realistic that patients had difficulty distinguishing them from reality. But Marcus Webb showed no signs of head injury, and his toxicology screen had come back completely clean. "Can you describe these opponents?" she asked, her professional curiosity overriding her skepticism. Marcus closed his eyes, and, when he spoke, his voice took on a distant quality, as if he were watching scenes play out in his memory. They were tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet. Their skin had this metallic quality, like it was made of some kind of flexible metal. They moved faster than anything human-sized should be able to move, and they were strong. Incredibly strong. I remember one of them throwing me across the arena like I weighed nothing. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Dr. Chen. "But I won. I always won. That was my purpose there, my function. I was the human champion, proof that Earth's fighters could compete against beings from other worlds." Dr. Chen set down her clipboard. This was moving beyond simple post-traumatic confusion into territory that made her deeply uncomfortable. "Marcus, I need you to understand that what you're describing isn't possible. There's no evidence of extraterrestrial life, let alone organized combat between species." Marcus stood up, and Dr. Chen instinctively took a step backward. He was taller than she had realized, and there was something about his presence that filled the room in a way that seemed to press against her consciousness. "Doctor," he said, and his tone was patient but firm, "I understand how this sounds. But I need you to run some tests." "What kind of tests?" "Test my reaction time. Test my strength. Test my endurance. Then, compare the results to normal human parameters." He flexed his hands, and the tendons stood out like steel cables. "I think you'll find that my body has been changed in ways that your medical training can't explain." Against her better judgment, Dr. Chen found herself intrigued. She had always prided herself on being a scientist first, and scientists demanded evidence rather than assumptions. "All right," she said. "But if we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly, with controls and measurements." Over the next several hours, Dr. Chen put Marcus through a series of tests that grew progressively more unusual. His reflexes weren't just fast, they were superhuman. When she dropped a pen near his hand, he caught it before it had fallen 6 inches, moving with a speed that was almost impossible to follow. His grip strength measured at levels that should have required specialized equipment to achieve. When she had him perform simple exercises, his heart rate barely elevated above resting levels. But the most disturbing test was one that Marcus suggested himself. "Cut me," he said, holding out his arm. "I'm sorry, what?" "Make a small incision. I want to show you something about how I heal." Dr. Chen hesitated. Everything about this request violated medical ethics and common sense. But something in Marcus's expression, a certainty that went beyond arrogance or delusion, made her reach for a surgical scalpel. The cut she made was small and shallow, barely deep enough to draw blood. Under normal circumstances, it would have required cleaning, possibly a bandage, and would have taken several days to heal completely. Instead, Dr. Chen watched in fascination and growing horror as the wound began to close almost immediately. Within minutes, there was nothing left but a faint pink line. Within an hour, even that had disappeared. "Now do you believe me?" Marcus asked. Dr. Chen stared at the unmarked skin where the incision had been. Every scientific principle she had ever learned told her that what she had just witnessed was impossible. But the evidence was right in front of her, undeniable and terrifying. "I don't know what to believe," she admitted. Marcus sat back down on the hospital bed, and, for the first time since he had awakened, he looked tired. Not physically tired, but emotionally drained, as if the effort of maintaining his composure was finally wearing on him. "Doctor, I need you to understand something," he said. "I don't remember how I got to that park. I don't remember anything after my last fight in the arena. But I remember everything that happened before that, and it's starting to feel less like memory and more like something that was implanted in my mind." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'm starting to wonder if Marcus Webb, human fighting champion of an intergalactic arena, was ever real at all. Maybe I'm something else entirely, something that was programmed to believe it was human." He looked up at her, and there was a vulnerability in his expression that hadn't been there before. "The question is, if I'm not who I think I am, then what am I? And why was I left on that bench with my memories intact?" Dr. Chen realized that she was no longer dealing with a medical case. She was dealing with something that challenged the fundamental nature of reality itself. And she had no idea what to do next. What she did know was that Marcus Webb, whatever he was, represented a mystery that could change everything humanity believed about itself and its place in the universe. The only question was whether she was brave enough to help him find the answers, even if those answers turned out to be more terrifying than the questions themselves. Dr. Chen couldn't sleep that night. After her shift ended at 6 a.m., she drove home to her small apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, but instead of going to bed, she found herself sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of medical journals, searching for anything that might explain what she had witnessed. The rational explanations felt increasingly hollow. Genetic disorders that enhanced healing weren't unknown, but they typically came with serious side effects and limitations that Marcus didn't seem to possess. Performance-enhancing drugs could account for some of his physical capabilities, but not the healing, and certainly not the perfect blood chemistry that should have been impossible to maintain with any known substance. By noon, she had exhausted every scientific possibility she could think of, and she was left with the uncomfortable realization that Marcus Webb's explanation, impossible as it seemed, was the only one that fit all the evidence. She returned to the hospital earlier than necessary, telling herself it was to check on other patients, but knowing that she was really coming back to see Marcus. She found him sitting in his hospital bed, staring out the window at the Denver skyline with an expression of deep concentration. "Any changes in your memory?" she asked as she entered the room. Marcus turned to look at her, and she noticed that his eyes seemed different somehow. More focused, as if something had crystallized in his mind overnight. "More details," he said. "And they're starting to make sense in a way that terrifies me." Dr. Chen pulled up a chair. "Tell me." "The arena wasn't just a fighting pit," Marcus began, his voice taking on the same distant quality it had the night before. "It was a research facility. Every fight was monitored, recorded, analyzed. They weren't just entertainment, they were experiments. The beings running the facility were studying human responses to stress, pain, fear, and aggression under conditions that couldn't be replicated on Earth." He stood up and began pacing the small room, his movements precise and controlled despite the obvious agitation in his voice. "I remember now that there were other humans there. Dozens of them. They all had the same enhanced capabilities that I do, but they were different in other ways. Some were faster, others stronger, others had enhanced senses or reaction times. It was as if they were testing different modifications to the basic human template." Dr. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened to the others?" "That's what I can't remember clearly," Marcus admitted. "Some of them lost fights and didn't come back. Others seemed to burn out, as if their enhancements consumed them from the inside. A few disappeared between fights, and I never learned where they went." He stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "But I was different. I never lost. I adapted to every opponent, every fighting style, every weapon they gave me. The beings running the experiments became increasingly interested in me, and that's when the real testing began." "What kind of testing?" "Psychological evaluation. They would put me in scenarios designed to test my emotional responses, my ability to make tactical decisions under pressure, my willingness to sacrifice others for strategic advantage." Marcus sat back down, and his hands clenched into fists. "I think they were trying to determine if I could be trusted with greater responsibilities." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "What kind of responsibilities?" "That's where the memories become unclear," Marcus said, frustration evident in his voice. "But I have flashes of conversations with beings who weren't my usual handlers. They spoke about Earth, about humanity's potential, about preparation for something they called the integration. I think they were grooming me to serve as some kind of liaison or representative." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Chen turned to see Dr. Robert Martinez, the hospital's chief of psychiatry, standing in the doorway with a concerned expression. "Sarah, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Dr. Chen excused herself and followed Dr. Martinez into the hallway, where he immediately began speaking in the low, urgent tones that hospital staff used when discussing particularly sensitive cases. "I've been reviewing the file on your Jane Doe patient," he said, using the standard designation for unidentified patients. "The combination of his physical anomalies and the content of his statements has raised some red flags with the administration." "What kind of red flags?" "The kind that suggest we might be dealing with someone who poses a security risk," Dr. Martinez replied. "His physical capabilities alone are concerning, but, combined with his detailed knowledge of what appears to be an elaborate fictional scenario involving extraterrestrial beings, the hospital's legal department is worried about liability issues." Dr. Chen felt her heart sink. "Bob, I've run every test I can think of. There's no evidence of psychiatric illness, no signs of drug use, no indication of brain trauma. Whatever is going on with Marcus Webb, it's not a mental health crisis." "Marcus Webb doesn't exist," Dr. Martinez said quietly. The words hit Dr. Chen like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "I ran his name through every database we have access to. Social Security, DMV records, credit reports, criminal background checks. There is no record of anyone named Marcus Webb matching his description anywhere in the United States. As far as the government is concerned, this man doesn't exist. Dr. Chen stared at her colleague, trying to process the implications of what he was telling her. That's impossible. He has to have a legal identity somewhere. Does he? Dr. Martinez asked. Think about what you've observed. Perfect physical health, enhanced healing, superhuman reflexes, and memories of experiences that couldn't have happened on Earth. Add to that the fact that he has no legal identity, and what conclusion are you forced to draw? The conclusion was one that Dr. Chen had been trying to avoid since the previous night, but she could no longer ignore the evidence. That he's not human. Or that he's a human who has been so extensively modified that he no longer fits within normal parameters, Dr. Martinez said. Either way, this is beyond the scope of what this hospital is equipped to handle. I've made some calls to colleagues at the CDC and the Department of Defense. They're sending a team to evaluate the situation. Dr. Chen felt a surge of panic. Bob, you can't turn him over to the government. We don't even know what he is or what's been done to him. That's exactly why we need to turn him over to people with the resources and expertise to figure it out, Dr. Martinez replied. Sarah, I understand that you feel a professional obligation to this patient, but you have to consider the bigger picture. If Marcus Webb is what he claims to be, if he really is some kind of enhanced human created by extraterrestrial beings, then this is a matter of national security. And if he's not? If he's just someone who has been subjected to experimental procedures by human scientists and programmed with false memories? What happens to him then? Dr. Martinez didn't have an answer for that, and his silence was more unsettling than anything he could have said. Dr. Chen returned to Marcus's room with her mind racing. She found him standing by the window again, but this time he turned to face her immediately, as if he had been waiting for her return. They're coming for me, aren't they? He said without preamble. How did you know?